mentioned about state electricity boards. That kind of it is a very reform-oriented measure, but it's got sort of buried under so much of other reforms which have been announced. What could be the implications on electricity boards? And they've been struggling, and they've have this problem of where they can't raise prices, but they'll owe banks a lot of money, right?
No, I think this is one of those issues which is fundamental to the health of the power sector, right? If you're a private power producer, or even if you're a state-owned power producer, your customer is a state electricity board, right? I'm assuming you're not a captive power producer, right? Your customer is a state electricity board. And most state electricity boards are bankrupt. They don't have money. Right. And why don't they have money? Because it's just the legacy of populism, right? Free power, subsidized power, T&D losses. But they're in bad shape. Right. How do you set them right? You know, the first part is getting their finances in order. And part of the solution that's being suggested involves the issue of long-term bonds, and it also involves restructuring some part of the debt that they have, which will clear their finances. But it also involves raising prices, right? What I mentioned, you know, the whole user charges move, and this is something that free market economists have been propounding for a long time, right? You can't afford not to levy user charges. You have to have a fair price, a competitive price, a cost-related price for power, which has a certain return factored in and everything else. And I think we'll see the move towards that. Already, if you look at what's happening across states, many states have raised their power tariffs. Several other states have said for sure that they'll raise their power tariffs. Because I think irrespective of their political leanings, most political parties realize that the state electricity boards are in very bad shape. And they realize that if they continue down this path, there's just no future. Right? So I think you can attribute everything in some way to this. You know, the fact that there are grid failures, the fact that power companies are in bad shape, the fact that banks have unhealthy exposure to the power sector. I think everything stems in some way from this reluctance of governments through the ages in India to levy user charges.
I think the power grid failure was a big wake-up call. But again, they're putting this onus on the states to kind of issue bonds and, you know, help in the restructuring. There are several other issues like LPG. They're again putting the onus on the states. Do you think the states will take it well? Because there are issues like GST, where there's sort of a disagreement between the center and the states in terms of power. How do you see this picture kind of shaping up?
Yeah, GST is a different issue altogether, right? So I think GST is a great move, right? Because it's time you created a unified market. But let's leave GST out of this. But I think if you were to look at the power sector, if you were to look at state electricity boards, I think states realize the issue. And I think every state realizes this issue, because let's take the example of Tamil Nadu, right? You go back in time 10 years, Tamil Nadu was a state that had excess of power. You look at Tamil Nadu today, it's a power deficient state. Its SEB is laboring the brink of near bankruptcy. Why has this happened, right? Irrespective of your political leanings, you should know why this has happened. So I think there is some recognition among parties of all hues, among all state governments, that they need to get this right. So this is something they'll go ahead with. Taxation, GST, is a different issue, right? Because it requires an amendment of the law, because the states have power to tax. You are effectively taking away that power to tax from them, right? You may still give them exceptions. It's a big thing, right? Because right from independence, states have had that power, and you can't suddenly take that power away from them. So this series of negotiations that have been happening stems from that basic fact. So I don't know. I'm personally still very hopeful about GST, because I think it would be one of the most reformist measures that this country has seen, but it's going to take time, and it's going to involve a lot of political behind the scenes work, right? Because that's how governments work. I mean, that's how governments all over the world work, right? You have to work with people whose ideology doesn't really match with yours, and convince them that they have to do something for the larger good. And in doing that, there's some give, there's some take, but you have to do that. And I think the big problem in India is that last 12 months, we haven't seen too much of that happening. So you will have to get back into that mode.
So you're saying that in this reform rush, maybe GST will take some more time.
Yeah, I'm not counting on GST as one of the things that we're going to see immediately. It's going to take quite some time. And I think that's what the finance minister also said, right? He said it will happen, but it'll take time.
On a lighter note, Sukumar, this week we've seen the launch of iPhone, right? But India has been left out. There's so much excitement about this new device. What is your sense of, how do you see this coming? Because every new product that comes out of Apple headquarters, it has to go through that test of whether it's innovative enough after Steve Jobs. How do you look at it?
We carried a review from the Wall Street Journal's Walt Mossberg, and that, according to that, this is the best iPhone ever. And he knows what he's talking about. So I think if you were to look at the phone per se, maybe the latest device from Samsung is comparable, right? But I think the iPhone has now become more than a product. It's become a cult, right? Most of the products that come out from Apple have become a cult. And the interesting thing is, right from the time they launched, even during their toughest years, they were always a cult, a cult brand. There were these people who would swear by Apple products. There were these people who would swear by the Mac, but their number was very small. I think what's happened over the years is that that number has increased significantly, so that's now really in many ways the mainstream. But it's very tough to say with tech brands. 10 years from now would an iPhone 20 it would still be or the iPhone 15, right? It would still be the most preferred device. I don't know, because you go back in time 10 years, Nokia had a 70% share of the market in India. You go back in time 5 years, Nokia had a 50% share globally. That's changed, and it's almost changed overnight. And in many ways it's changed because of the iPhone. I just think we are seeing probably the end of a cycle, right? Because if you look at smartphones, where do they go from here? It seems like an industry that's waiting for something very significant, one big leap that needs to come. The leap can come through design, the leap can come through technology, the leap can come from one particular product or brand, and in many ways I think the first iPhone represented one such leap. But what will the next one be? I don't know.
There's only so much that you can improvise on one product.
Exactly.
Right? Thanks again for joining us on the show. On that note, we end today's EdSpace. Stay tuned for more.